Hey everybody, we are listening to a track called Slow Burn by an artist named Llinks. It's a little different from the repertoire of jazz and instrumental music I usually like to showcase on this podcast, but it's produced by my guest today, Justin Mathews, a fellow New School alum who ended up going into the pop world and has been doing some really interesting creative stuff. Changed my mind about some things. We had a really interesting conversation. I'd like to share it with you. It centers around Spotify, and Justin wrote a really interesting post sort of challenging the narrative that musicians often have about how Spotify is trash and is making life miserable for artists and musicians. So have a listen, decide for yourself. Thanks so much. Are back. Welcome to Between the Gigs. I'm your host, Marty Eisenberg, and today my guest is Justin Mathews. Hi, Justin.
Hey.
So we went to college together at the New School for Jazz back in... I graduated 2008. Is that when you graduated?
Technically, I didn't graduate.
Oh, good for you. That's very cool.
I'm in that elite club of people who attended and didn't graduate.
When did you leave this, or like how many years did you do?
It was supposed to be 08. I stretched it out to 09, and then it just didn't come together.
Yeah.
And I left.
Yeah. What were you missing?
I think a couple liberal
ensemble.
arts classes. It definitely was something stupid, and it just didn't come together. I kind of ran out of financial aid. And, got some good traveling experience, and I was like, I'm gonna just get out of here for a little while.
Cool. Well, I brought you on today because I saw a post that you did on Facebook not too long ago that I thought was a pretty hot take about Spotify and streaming, and it actually really changed the way I had thought about streaming and Spotify, and I thought it would be an interesting conversation to talk about.
Okay.
Before we dive too deep into that, though, I'm very curious, like what your career and life has been like for the past 12 some years.
Sure. Well, for a little while I was doing, while I was in New School, I was doing the Friday, Saturday, Thursday, every week jazz grind.
Yeah.
Swing 46 and Soul Food Restaurant and so on, and that was fun.
Yeah.
But it definitely got to a place where it's like there's a certain trajectory. I wasn't going to be a Kurt Rosenwinkel. I wasn't going to be that kind of a jazz guitar player dude.
Right.
So, and I've always had other interests. I like computer music. I was doing that when I was 12, and I never stopped. So as that started to become a more popular thing, I got into artist development, and I got into production, and got into pop music.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to have a couple inroads into accompanying people like Seven Streeter, going on tour with Wyclef Jean, Alexis Jordan, Ravon Brown, and I got kind of an insight into the money-making side of pop music, for better or for worse. I got to see how the PR machine worked, how the boardroom meetings worked, playing in the office at Vivo, playing in the office at Yahoo, right? And there was a couple other dribs and drabs of sort of other related things, but that was the main trajectory.
Yeah.
I went from there into having a studio. I currently work out of a studio on 29th, and
a recording studio?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a the modern connotation. It's my production room.
Yeah.
It's actually a production room inside of Dave Darlington's studio.
Cool.
Who is a pretty inspirational dude because, he got his start basically defining the sound of disco and house from 90s stuff like CNC Music Factory to Whitney Houston, this, that, whatever. Yeah. And he's, a bit older, and I see him in there every day, and He gets there before me. He leaves after.
That's cool.
It's cool. It's like,
Yeah.
man, I think I work too much.
Yeah.
He really is always working. And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I must be doing something right.
Yeah.
So that's cool. But anyway, so it's a production studio. It's a small studio with a vocal booth and a mixing area, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Which is what kind of you need now.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, I couldn't afford to have a giant live room. I wouldn't be using it all the time.
Yeah.
Some people can do it. I can't. So anyway, I've been doing that. I have focused this year on artist development, right? Kind of dipped my toes in and said to the most recent artist I'm working with right now, I said, look, after you leave my studio, I want to be able to shop you out. If you want to take this plunge with me, we'll do the whole album, and we'll go through the contacts, and we'll do email blasts, and like I'll stay with the project. It's not going to just leave when you walk out the door.
Wow.
And you know, I was like, I'm totally unqualified. I'm not the person that should be doing this, but if I don't do it, no one's going to do it. And
Right.
I want to see what happens.
Yeah.
Within a week, we had extreme success.
Wow.
And I'm happy to report that, excuse me, I promise that this was not planned. Her single release is today.
Oh, perfect. That's
I woke
awesome.
up this morning, I was like, holy shit, that's today. So
What's the name of the artist and what's the name of the single?
the artist's name is Llinks. The single is called Slow Burn. And it's premiered on Ear Milk this morning, as of this morning.
Very cool.
Yeah, and it was like perfect timing. So I promise this wasn't a planned PR blitz. It just happened that way. So anyway, the point is that this particular career, you know, it was very specific to the people that I knew and very specific opportunities.
Yeah.
And it's very much, I wouldn't say that it's a career, like a stagnant career path. It is a process.
Of course, yeah.
We're still looking at the bounds of what it's going to be.
Yeah. Can I nitpick some questions in there?
Absolutely.
So, first of all, are you an ex-jazzer? What is your relationship to jazz now?
Yeah, I would not say an ex-jazzer. I still shed jazz.
Yeah. I've seen some videos of you like shedding fourths patterns and stuff like that.
Yeah, I definitely still, I don't necessarily do it so much in public.
Yeah.
I just played a jazz-related gig at Canary Club with my friend Sinke, who's a great drummer. It was this guy, Michael Feinberg, the bass player. It was his gig,
Cool.
right? And he's been doing kind of a residency thing there, where seemingly everyone in the city is playing this gig.
It's cool.
It must be a very wide net because I ended up in it, right?
Yeah,
I was
right.
like, okay.
Did you know Mike before that?
I played with him one other time,
Yeah.
like I think maybe 2 or 3 years prior. It was a reconnection. And it was a fun reconnection. We played fun stuff.
Yeah,
You know,
huh.
kind of soul jazz. That's kind of my bag anyway.
Sure. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's, as a guitar player, I think a lot of guitar players are into that, and
I mean,
I'm one of them.
in New York, there's it feels like there's, you know, in like the jazz world. I mean, you're right. There's a lot of them, but I wish there were more almost sometimes, you know.
So I'm actually looking at maybe also dipping my toes into trying to get a soul jazz gig on my own.
Cool.
Again, and I think I almost want to say, like, to people who play jazz, like, oh, it's kind of a jazz gig. But to non-jazz people, I don't think I would even say that.
Yeah.
Not because of the negative connotation
Right.
of jazz or whatever, but just because
You can cast a wider net. And the music probably the covers you do are people stuff that people would know a little bit more than.
yeah. And I just think I wouldn't even want to put myself up there into the same even conversation with somebody like a Kreisberg or something like that. I'd be like, look, this city is full of incredible jazz guitar players. They're doing really, really, really next level stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to do current level, not next level,
Fair.
like whatever the level is right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
But I do miss improvising in front of people for money is fun.
Yes, it is.
And
Yeah.
I like to be
Yeah.
able to try to do it on my own terms. It would be fun.
What was touring with Wyclef like? Were you on guitar on that or?
So he actually signed an artist that I worked with.
Gotcha.
So we opened for him.
Cool.
And he kind of shepherded her through this whole thing. And it was kind of cool because not only did we get to travel with him, but we worked a lot with him here in the city and had a certain amount of, I don't want to say safety, but a certain amount of like hand holding,
Right.
which was great. You know, I think that I got to see what it's like just for a little while to have the kind of care and attention that you got pre-2000 in the old music industry, right?
Yeah.
It barely exists now in that sense. But when
Right.
we went in there, you know, we would land places, right? And it sounds kind of silly. I mean, I don't know if I should even say this, but like he would be like, I don't like the car. Let's get a better car,
Yeah.
like to get from the airport to the hotel.
Yeah.
And like, it's kind of princess-ish, right? But on the other hand, you know, when is somebody in 2020 going to get to even experience that?
Yeah,
so it
that's
was
true.
kind of fun to see because in his defense, and in the defense of most of the people who do that stuff in the old industry, it's out of extreme care for their artists. You know,
Yes.
they see themselves as caretakers.
Yeah, that's a good
And
point.
it's cool to feel like someone's taking care of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I did a musical out in San Diego a year or so ago, and just having my own like guitar tech who would like tune the guitar for me, it just felt so good. It felt so real, you know?
I did not have a guitar tech
Yeah?
on that tour, so that would have been nice.
Would it be, imagine someone
Yeah.
else tuning your guitar, and then if it's out of tune, you can get mad at somebody. Not that I would.
No, yeah. Broke a string in the middle of my set last night, by the way.
Oh,
I
yikes.
was just thinking about that. You
Yeah.
know, it would be nice to have a guitar tech. But anyway.
All right, so let's dive into this rant you went on a little bit, and I mean that in the best way.
Sure.
So it was essentially a opinion. So for those of you that don't know, there's been a big shift in the music industry, and it's called streaming. And Spotify is the biggest company that is available. And many musicians will go online and post about their earnings from Spotify. Spotify pays about 4 to 3 thousandths of a cent per stream, and so it makes it difficult to earn money off of Spotify. So many people will complain about it, and I guess at the end of whenever this was, 2019 maybe, people were posting about their year and the end of the year Spotify earnings. And so what sort of set you off at that moment?
Okay. Well, I have a couple people that are maybe not closest of friends, but they're highly vocal online, right?
Right.
And because I guess I engage with their posts the most, just reading them, they are overrepresented. So after the post in question, I think I went back and I was like, maybe this isn't the cultural phenomenon that I thought it was. Maybe it's just like 4 people that I know. But that said,
I think it's fair. I mean, you definitely do. Well, go ahead.
So that said, I had a couple people that I knew who were. I mean, you think what I wrote was a rant? These guys were legitimately, I would say, almost like bordering on cruelty. Exposing their cruelty in saying that the current young generation needs to stop posting their end of year numbers on Spotify as if it's worth something.
Right.
It was that was definitely the tone, and it wasn't just coming from any one person, and I definitely wouldn't want to call anybody out.
Mm-hmm.
But it was this overarching thing of like, how dare they? How dare they think that's a good thing? And it's like, okay, it was a critique of Spotify, but also a very thinly veiled critique of being proud of using Spotify and having any kind of success as a younger person in music.
Yeah.
So to me, I couldn't help but to think it's like, okay, we get that you never got what you wanted, but you can't hate on someone else's hustle in music.
Yes.
And it is a hustle.
Agreed.
And I think most people that are really active in music definitely understand that it's still a hustle.
Yeah.
Right. There's nothing really pure about it.
Right.
And so I have to say that, like, I didn't think it was a particularly hot take to say, like, let people be proud of what they're proud of, because that's really what it was.
Yeah.
You don't have to tear people down in the new music industry.
Right.
In fact, I think it's kind of important that you don't. I think it's a bad look.
Yeah.
So honestly, I was thinking about it in the car on the way here. I was like, I think that was a cold take.
Well, cold take or hot take. I mean, here's what I found interesting about it. I think that part of your post was about, maybe some people who are sending some not so positive messages. And I guess to sort of analyze what they're trying to say is maybe for these younger musicians who are posting about their success on Spotify, it's going against the movement of trying to stop Spotify,
Right.
which there is not.
I was about to
a
say,
sufficient movement.
is there a movement to stop Spotify?
Well, that's something that I've
could
been
there be?
thinking about. Could there be? I mean, that's a good, so for myself, I had stopped using Spotify for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
And what ended up happening to me is just my consumption of music went down. I didn't actually start buying more things. And it's like, well, if Spotify is like $10 a month and it's $100 a year, I should have $100 that I can spend on, stuff. But I didn't spend it.
Yeah.
And, I'm someone who's a musician who, should be. So it's like.
I see some vinyl over there. Do you buy vinyl?
I don't.
Okay.
Because I live in New York. I have a small apartment. I can't, I wish that I did. I mean, I might at some point, but I haven't taken that step yet.
Oh, you're lucky.
Yeah. Oh, well, maybe.
Once you do, there's like no going back. And
Yeah,
you're like,
sure.
oh, well, there goes the rest of my life. So.
So I think that we are at a moment in time where all these things are sort of happening at once, but I think consumers have more power to influence companies that they've ever had before because of social media. And I think you see a lot of examples of that with climate change and people saying we're not going to use these companies because of this and that. And then those companies actually changing their policy a little bit, obviously. And in other areas as well. And it just seems like, I don't know if there's ever going to be, even though most people seem to understand, there's lots of media that comes out about how Spotify is making it harder for artists to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's going to be a concerted effort ever to correct this. I don't know if we're going to be able to make enough noise about it.
What would a correction look like for you?
Well, I did some research in sort of like some other models that exist for how the funds could be distributed, and I mean, like, one basic way is you could just pay higher royalties, right? That's a basic thing. I mean, some of the other models that exist, in other apps, there's a app that's called Resonate, and they have a stream-to-own model. When you re-listen to a track, every time you re-listen to a track, the artist gets slightly more money for it. And once you listen to that track 9 times, then you own the album, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are models like that. Bandcamp is another model in which artists can directly upload their music, and there's a little bit more community interaction there. Like, people will write about music that's online. And the artists set their own price for their work. So lots of times artists will throw up their album for $10. You have to actually pay that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard articles talk about Bandcamp as it's a little bit more like an independent record store where people come and hang out and they pay for the art, compared to Spotify, which is a little bit more like Best Buy. There's the user-centric model where listeners, which would something that Spotify could apply, where what you listen to directly, Spotify directs the funds a little bit more to that artist. So that would make, instead of streaming be 0.004 of a cent per stream, it'd be kind of a variable system. I don't know if any of these things are really going to make that much of a difference. I do question if it makes sense when you look at other media like Netflix. They don't have every fucking movie ever made on their service,
Right.
You pay $10 a month, you have what's available right now. Does it really make sense for Spotify to give away everything that's ever been created for $10 a month? I mean, there are adjustments like that could be made. Obviously, we're never going to go back to buying CD by CD. I think that's not the case. But the other thing that comes into play with these big tech companies is that none of them actually make money.
Right.
So if Spotify makes something like $5 billion a year in sales, and the overall sales of music have increased in the sort of streaming era, which is a good thing. But every year they lose like millions to maybe even billions of dollars, because it's something like Uber does the same thing. Lots of companies do. They're just trying to take over the entire market.
Right.
And then maybe at some point they turn profitable. So is this
Spotify
really...
wasn't profitable for a long time.
They still aren't.
I believe that they actually are now.
Are they?
I believe so.
If they are, it would have
so,
to be
it's
like...
by like $5,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, so, and then I was watching a lot of videos about, Spotify and watching these big like tech, entrepreneurs make the case for why their service should exist. Uh-huh. And one of the main arguments is that like, if there wasn't these streaming services that made it so convenient for people, that pirating would be like, back again. And although that's probably true, it really seems like a late stage capitalist, explanation. Like if you don't give all the money to us and we give a tiny bit to the artist, then nobody gets any money, like.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line with the music industry has always been the money actually has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
It's kind of insane that there was a huge recording business, right? Like when you look at it didn't just arise overnight. It came out of what I would call the initial exploitation of like record companies at the very, very beginning, going around mining local areas, convincing people to sign away their rights, and then making recordings that were separate from songs, putting them in jukeboxes, doing whatever they had to do. It comes from a centrally exploitative model. Yeah. A couple of people got really rich doing that. And eventually it got to the point where there was so much money going around that a couple people on top, even, maybe a comparably larger percentage of musicians than make it now,
right?
As far as, top income in recordings. But still, it's not like everybody was walking around making, megabucks, rock stars. There were still rock stars. Yeah. But those rock stars, their proportion was so high. I think that that's sort of like a strange fluke. It's sort of unprecedented. It doesn't, I don't think that there maybe will ever be a rock star of the tech era. Like something in the medium is going to have to change. I don't see how we could have rock stars when the final delivery product is the same 16-bit 44.1 Red Book audio delivery mechanism, right? It's like this is a solved problem. We have figured out how to hyper efficiently deliver recordings to people at a price that they like.
Yeah.
The bottom line is that most people did not like having to spend $18.99 on a CD, right?
Yeah,
and that was the price during the Tower Records era, 90s heyday of the CD.
Yeah.
The single greatest drop in music revenues, that's overall music industry revenue, was between 2000 and 2001.
Yeah, when Napster
came out.
Yeah.
I was caught up in it. You
of
probably
course.
were too. You're
yeah.
like, what do you mean? I don't have
to
spend money anymore? All right, let's go.
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line. I mean, you're not dealing with, socially conscious consumers when it comes to music. It's done alone. It's not usually done publicly. So, given that opportunity, people are going to pay as little as they can.
Yeah.
And, that unfortunately, being a musician, you don't choose the economy that you're in. There are a lot of things that we don't choose, right? And deciding that you're going to work within the contours of what we have and try to make it work for you is not a terrible choice. It shouldn't be controversial to me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Maybe you can go into a little bit how successful musicians use Spotify well, which I also thought was interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, as I mentioned before, when it comes to artist development, I am kind of unqualified, right? I'm a music producer, and I have gotten to see a couple successful things happen. But, please, I'm not the be-all, end-all of this conversation. That said, I've been lucky enough to be part of campaigns.
Yeah.
And maybe, if not to see how artists use streaming, but to see how management uses streaming.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's kind of important. Artists, I think, are for the most part, I don't want to say unaware, but maybe that is what I'm going to say. Maybe artists are unaware of just how calculated it's always been. So now that they have access under the hood and they can look at the numbers and they can go, oh man, that's crazy. I wanted to sign a record deal, and they said, how many numbers do you have on Spotify? And I said, not that many, and they didn't sign me. They think that that's unusual, right? Because they think that there was a time where you could walk into a boardroom and captivate the audience and then get your deal, right? They think that they weren't also looking at numbers. Whereas, the whole thing back then, you got your numbers by opening for terrible people all over the Midwest, right? I mean, you had to be in a hatchback and not break even at the end of a tour and split your gas money.
Right.
And now that's a quantifiable thing that you do on computers. You send enough emails and you get to see it. But I see them as roughly analogous processes. That said, the way people are using Spotify now, I think, and not even just Spotify, I'm like the 1% people that use Tidal.
Do you use Tidal?
Someone still uses it. From an engineering perspective, it sounds better.
Yeah.
And even when because they put time into the transcoding or whatever, I don't think that it's not like a lossless versus not lossless argument. I think sometimes they're just working from superior source material, right? Because I am probably one of those people that would say, no, you can always hear it, and then you could A/B test it, and I would get it wrong, probably. But I do think that the attention given is higher. Anyway, that said, one thing that PR companies do for artists is that they focus on playlisting. And I'm talking about your modern boutique PR company with a good track record right now. They've got built-in relationships. They have pipelines to good playlists. And to me, there's no path to music success without being on the right playlist at the right time. As you mentioned, does it make sense for Spotify to have the entire history of recorded music? And first of all, no. And second of all, because it does, there is no charm in looking for something on Spotify.
Yes, that's true.
Rifling through stacks of vinyl is fun for people that don't even like music.
Yeah, that's
right?
true. That's
but
very
there's
true.
nothing. It's like browsing Spotify is like looking at Excel, right? It's just it's boring. Everything. It's crazy. You'll have Nefertiti, right? And then right next to that, you'll have the Korean karaoke version, right?
Yeah.
Right underneath of it, right?
Yeah.
You'll be like, how are there karaoke versions of jazz songs?
Yeah.
And it's awful, right?
I had that experience too when I would be looking at trying to learn a jazz standard, and I'd search a tune, and the list would come up, and some of the versions would just be awful. They'd be these really corny ass versions.
And you're seeing that they're given roughly the same weight.
Yeah.
The same gravity on Spotify. And that to me is one of the gravest problems with it, right? Is that, some of these records deserve to be elevated so high that when you type in jazz, that's the first thing that comes out. Or when you type in trap or whatever it is. We don't need all the karaoke versions. We definitely need some kind of acknowledgement that, this is the sort of standard bearer. Anyway, playlisting and discovery in general it's sort of the stopgap. It's the thing that's supposed to fix that, right? It's a filter. And that's the only way, it's the only path to success right now is getting in the right filter.
Right.
Spotify's recommendations, personally for me, are usually not that good.
Yeah.
Tidal's a little bit better. And I think the very best thing that you can do is to have your music in a place that you have previously heard about music that you like, right? And so for that reason, even though we're definitely 10 or 12 years after the blog, there still are music blogs, right?
Yeah, there are.
And people still consider them slightly authoritative, right? So you get to this place where streamers are really more like repositories than they are like places that you actively hang out, right?
Right.
And that's fine. That's really okay. It's not like they don't do anything, right? They do pay for server upkeep. They create a product that makes it so that you can be anywhere in the world and you can click on something and it plays.
Yeah.
I have a cloud drive. My cloud drive can't do that, right? So it's not like they don't do anything.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like, they make billions of dollars and literally nothing is returned back to the music community.
Right.
I do think they could pay a bit more per stream. On the other hand, if you look at the actual proportion of money paid out to rights holders, for me personally, it becomes very clear that while they are an antagonist, they're not the enemy.
Right.
The Byzantine structure of rights absolutely is.
Yes, that was something else I had meant to talk about. Yeah, because we're building all of these, like the I don't know a whole lot about the legal aspect of it, but from my understanding,
Dude, neither do I. I'm trying.
Nobody does, right? That's the point of the law is to in some, or the point of lawyers to sort of obscure the language with very complex, like subtext and paragraphs and all this stuff to make it complicated so that we can't understand it, so we can't really
Well, they don't want you to see how exploitative it is. I'm telling you, I mean, you don't start by like going out into the sticks and saying sing into this can and then disappear, right? That's what they said in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Right.
I always think of like that is totally how the record industry started, right?
Yeah.
And it's very clear from how it works now. You still feel a little bit when you're signing contracts. You still feel a little bit like, yes, I will sing into your can.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, some of the rules make no sense. The fact that, when a song is played on the radio, you get 100% of the songwriting royalties, and when it's streamed, you get something like 20%.
Yeah.
Just not taking into account, and they'll never well, that's law stuff. I'm not going to get into that.
Right.
So if streaming, the way that you described it in the thing that you had written, I mean, it just sort of gives credence to the idea that the recording is no longer the end product, the end revenue stream. It becomes part of your sort of virtual business card to get other work. So what is the end revenue stream? Is there an end revenue stream, or is it just about influence?
Well, let's figure this out right now,
Yeah,
and then we can tell everybody.
Fair enough. Okay.
But
what insight do you have on that?
Yeah, well, okay. So one of the huge people are now becoming aware that what they create inside of the mechanism is the most important thing. Mechanism being like the end delivery mechanism, right? So the underlying. Let's say you're a music producer. A lot of music is produced now. It's electronic. It's like a couple people, a collective of people that decide to coalesce around a producer, and they kind of make a recording so that the song is more than just a chord progression with a melody.
Right.
It's a production. It's a whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So people are becoming aware that production itself constitutes something that is somehow separate from a recording and separate from a song. It's sort of a new thing. And the reason I put it that way is that if we call it something different, we create a possibility for many, many more people to be fairly compensated when it comes to licensing, when it comes to synchronization, which, they only grow. It used to be the recording itself was how you made money from consumers. Now there's a middleman, and the middleman is whoever's licensing your music, right? That's one potential stream. Mm-hmm. It is a giant growing stream, and there's only going to be more people that need synchronization and need licensing. And the current issue with licensing is that it definitely works with an older model. So you're looking at getting 7-12% on something, because there's an assumption that some songwriter is the most important person know.
Yeah.
But what a song is definitely different in a time where a song is 3 people in a basement who took a royalty-free loop and put their spin on it and then released it.
Yeah.
And that's a totally, by the way, I mean, there's a lot of precedent for that kind of music making. I would say bebop is almost that. Right?
Tell me about that.
Like,
because they did contrafactions on other songs?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole point of it is to take extremely well-known, almost public domain harmonic ideas, right? And then, flip it as hard as you can.
Yeah.
To show how cool you are.
Yeah.
But where would it have been, without rhythm changes, right?
Yeah.
Everyone goes, oh yeah, that Gershwin tune that everybody knows, right?
Yeah, wow.
How about we play that? I don't know. It's 2020 and people are still fucking playing it, right?
Yep, that's true. That's true. 100 years.
And importantly, they're literally all playing over the same changes, right?
Yeah.
So I always think it's funny when people want to say, because it's all it's people in our community, virtuosic level players, who are like, man, these guys are on Logic, like sitting around just using these prefabricated beats. It's like, bro, have you heard your record? It could be any one of the millions of jazz records. No offense to it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But the reason it's good is because because we're listening to you explore your personality over a bed of universally understood sort of references in your genre.
Right. Yeah.
And that's how music works now. It's become much easier to reference things in your genre because you can outright copy. Right. So that said, what is music in a time of outright copying when so much of it is digital, it's samples? We definitely do need a new way of describing what songwriting is. It needs to be mixed with production. And so what that means is it opens up. This doesn't close any doors. It only opens doors. It opens doors for people that are combinations of songwriters and music producers and singers and engineers and whatever.
Yeah.
To carve out contracts for themselves where they're getting not 12% on a sync, but like 50%.
Yeah.
Right? And certainly the future of the music business is going to be smaller, more basic, more easy to understand contracts. Mm-hmm. And importantly, we said before, Spotify, I think it's around 75% of the overall revenue ends up being paid out to rights holders.
Right.
And a lot of people don't know. When you get that statement and you look how many rights holders there are, especially if you're signed to a major label, well, there's too many.
Yeah.
Right? You're paying for overhead.
Yeah.
Which is harder and harder to justify.
Yeah.
In a time where you can do a lot of it yourself. I actually don't advocate that you necessarily do everything yourself, but you should have like one or two middlemen, not 50.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
And so that is sort of a path to success for certain people. And some people have already done it.
Yeah.
Some people have kept their teams small, used streaming as a sort of springboard, and then importantly, like done other stuff.
Yeah.
Right. They weren't like a lot of musicians, especially, sort of bedroom musicians, or I hate to say this, but, also people that just do a bunch of gigs, right? What they actually do from day to day is mostly, they shed at home.
Yeah.
That is their function in the music industry, is that they are home shedders.
Yeah.
And they put one thing out and they think, well, do people not think this is a compelling story? And it's like, no, because you don't do anything.
How do you mean?
Like shedding at home is very boring, right? I briefly interned at a music blog, and I remember they said, an album release is it's the cliche about journalism is dog bites man, and the only thing they're really interested in is man bites dog. That's news.
Right. Oh,
right.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's like a super corny journalism cliche, but it's very true for music. I mean, music news is so boring if it's just release dates and this and that, whatever.
That's true.
Whereas I met someone on TikTok and I'm a gay cowboy, right? That's extraordinarily interesting.
Yeah, sure.
And if you're going to be in pop music, you have to reconcile yourself with the fact that it's never going to just be about the sound. It literally never has only been about the sound.
True.
It's always been about a narrative and people wishing to align themselves with that narrative.
Yeah.
Jazz is absolutely, and I keep bringing that up because, we both went to jazz school and whatever. It is definitely, it's got its feet in both places, right? Because there's always going to be a contingent of people who really hold out for this idea that there's some kind of purity going on.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm really sympathetic to that argument.
Yes.
I like the conservatory approach. I like the idea that we could enter, 1,000-year dark ages and someone would be keeping this incredible thing going, regardless of whether it makes any money and regardless of whether anybody cares. I actually really like that.
Yeah.
But what I really don't like is when you tell everybody I'm devoting myself to this conservatory approach and you're also extraordinarily angry with other people for not caring.
Right.
It's like, look, you're not giving them any of what they want. You can't you can't be mad at them for that.
Right.
You're saying I'm above narrative. I'm above being, on the vanguard of what people like right now. It's like, well, fine, then be above it.
Yeah.
Don't be
that's
mad
fair.
when other people want to eat pizza.
Well, I think like okay, so the jazz lifestyle it's analogous to sort of like being a monk. Like there's so much
Absolutely.
self meditation with your instrument, and then, but part of the conservatory system is our mission is to not only do this music, but to also try to keep it in the public sphere. Or the public collective unconscious, like if we're not somehow keeping this music alive in audiences, then the whole conservatory system will probably, or the whole preserving of older musics is what I mean by conservatory system, whether you're a classical musician or a jazz musician, it will eventually crumble.
Maybe as it stands right now, right?
Yeah.
Because as of right now, conservatories and arts institutions and everybody, they need to make giant waves because they need giant donors to keep them alive.
Right.
Right. There's probably, certainly I'm not an expert on this, but does it have to stay that way?
I don't know.
Wouldn't a really proper conservatory be a commune that doesn't need money somewhere in the
That
desert?
does sound fun.
My brother is a mathematician, and he always tells me that what he would really like to do is start a math commune somewhere.
Ooh.
Right, where he and his other mathematicians can go out and grow their own food and not be beholden to an academic institution. Because
Wow.
in their own way, they're actually beholden to some of the same effects that
Right.
we are
Sure.
as musicians. And particularly, he's an applied mathematician, which means it's sort of pure math, right? Math for the sake of math.
Right.
It's not necessarily attached to, some cool tech idea. Or
That does sound pretty cool, though.
Does a math commune? It sounds good, right?
Well, like being a pure mathematician or pure math.
He's a
idea
cool
of
dude.
Math for math's sake.
But we talk a lot about that idea that, like, maybe money is sort of coloring our idea of exactly what needs to stick around as far as, forget conservatories. Some of the older established places that you see music now are absolutely, like, they're propped up. They're totally subsidized, which
true.
means that they are politicized.
That's true.
And
The Lincoln Center is now named David Koch Hall, after
You
one of
know?
the Koch brothers.
and do you think that you can do an effective, like, meaningful, subversive political work in a place like that?
Well,
Time will tell.
Yeah. I think that they they do, but is anyone listening?
Well, I'm playing at Lincoln Center in May, so everybody, I hope that you do come.
Cool. Wait, what's going on there then?
It's with Soundtrack 63, which is sort of a long-running exploration through Black music history.
Cool. Wow.
And obviously, I am the obvious person to be doing that. But I think I'm subbing for somebody.
Yeah.
I'm excited about it. It's gonna be awesome.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Well, just while we're here, you seem like someone who's very thoughtful about this type of thing. Speaking of art and Spotify, do you personally believe that art needs to have sort of a commerce tied to it for it to be relevant or tied to the moment that it comes from?
Definitely not.
Okay.
But that said, I just don't think that you get to have the complaint that you only follow your dream, you only follow your personal idea of what you want to do, and then simultaneously harbor resentment for the entire world that doesn't want to pay you for it.
Right.
Like, you just don't get both.
Yeah.
If what you're doing is worth money, people will let you know. And if what you're doing is worth praise, they'll praise and not pay, and that's fine.
Right.
If people don't know how to engage with it, but they respect you, obviously in the classical world for decades, for centuries, they've dealt with that. There are plenty of unknown composers. There are plenty, this is a cliche, right? That people become known after death.
Yeah.
It is absolutely a mix of luck and being in the right place at the right time and this and that, whatever, that makes you money in music in the first place. And not that shouldn't be fixed, but the resentment and cruelty that we give people who happen to succeed, it starts to look really ugly.
Yeah.
And I think that, if I could leave with anything, it would be that. It'd be like, we don't need any more ugliness. We don't need any more resentment.
Yeah.
We don't need to stoke that kind of tension. There are plenty of people who benefit when we don't like each other as musicians.
For
we
sure.
don't need to give them ammunition.
Yeah, that's perfectly fair. Sort of a final thought on the subject. Do you think that this sort of model that we're in now with streaming and the public's consumption of music is, now and forever? Is it will we ever return to a moment where artists are able to make, crazy sums of money based on their music? Or is it, and I'm asking you to be Nostradamus here, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Something's definitely going to happen. I've got a couple friends that are doing pretty amazing things, carving out niches for themselves, doing unprecedented mixes of like podcast and music and this and that, whatever, and making money on Patreon, right?
Right.
There's always going to be opportunity for people to make large sums of money doing something new.
Fair, yeah.
So is something very old going to come back, right? Like, playing music that people have heard before in a venue that people have been before, selling things in a medium that people have already done. Like that, I don't know. I don't think that will come back.
Yeah.
But I hope that we don't close ourselves off from, what's around the corner. We're in a time where we can be way more protective of our own rights. We're more empowered. We've got access to more information than ever about how to represent yourself in a business capacity. And there's no reason to think that smart, savvy young musicians can't take advantage of those things.
Yeah.
Especially if they're able to ignore the people that kind of want to kick the rungs out of the ladder.
Right.
Yeah,
sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Once again, my guest is Justin Mathews.
All right.
I know you have a new single that was just released today. Is there any other upcoming stuff you'd like to let people know about?
Actually, just this artist. I'm so excited about it. The single's coming out now. I think the next single is in a couple months, and then there's a full album.
Oh, cool. So you are releasing it single by single.
Yes.
And that's the way to do it these days, you think?
That seems to be the way to do it. And in fact, we kind of went back and forth a little while ago, going like, is there going to be an album at all? And eventually we're like, well, look, it was made as an album. It's cohesive. Like, so yeah. But it does seem to be to stagger singles is the way.
Cool.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for listening.